I've got my tip tinned. I've got it wiped down with a damp rag. It's nice and clean, nice and shiny. That's the first step. Now, the next thing we're going to do, we are going to tin some wires. Now, tinning the wires, it's kind of the same thing. We're going to heat them up with a soldering gun and apply the solder. Now, we don't want to heat the solder, really. We want to heat the material that we're trying to tin or trying to join. So, okay, there's that part. Now, the next thing is going to be tinning the wire. Now, when I tin the wire, I'm going to go ahead and take the soldering gun. I'm going to heat the wire up. Here's where I said something earlier about I don't want to heat the solder. I want to heat what I'm trying to place the solder to, or solder itself. So I'm going to place the wire on the soldering gun, and then I'm going to go ahead, heat that, and apply the solder to the wire. Once the wire gets hot enough to melt the solder will then melt, and the flux that's in there is going to again promote the solder flowing through all of those strands. Once I have that happen, I'm then going to remove the heat from the wire or the wire from the heat, being very careful not to disturb this part there. If that all goes well, then I'm going to have a nice tinned wire end. And the solder should look, like I say, the shiny side of tin foil. If it's the dull side of tin foil, well, there's a possibility that I disturbed something or I blew on the wire as it was going from its liquid solder to the solid. Okay, so if I'm putting two pieces together and I disturb them, typically the solder will look like, again, the dull side of tin foil, and we refer to that as a cold joint. Okay, now, I'm a one-man show here, so I'm going to have to hold the soldering gun with one hand, and I'm going to have to apply the heat and the wire with a little aid. Okay. All right, now I'm going to get the soldering gun hot enough to melt solder. How do I know that? Well, I'm going to melt solder on it. There we go. Nice molten pool. That's lovely. That is going to allow heat to transfer more rapidly than solid solder, or even the solid metal itself. All right, I've got the wire heating. It is on the very tip. I am now going to apply the solder to it. Now, if you take a look, that solder has basically been absorbed, kind of like a sponge sucks up water. Nice and shiny. Again, the shiny side of tin foil. Now, I will tell you that I applied a little too much heat to that. Now, by applying too much heat to this, again, I can cause damage to the insulation, which I've done right here. The other thing that happens, if I'm not careful with applying the heat and the solder, I can actually have the solder wick its way clear up into the insulation, which makes that way, way less flexible. So, okay, there's the one side. I want to go ahead and do the other side now. So we'll do the other side just the same way we did here. I'm going to put it down. I'm going to apply a little bit of solder to the tip. I'm going to then put my wire that I'm going to solder, just put the very tip of that in place, applying the heat just to the tip of that wire there. Oops. Again, that's what happens when I've only got two hands and nothing to help me here. There we go. Let's try that. Okay, I'm going to apply the heat and the solder. And the solder melts right into that. Okay, wicked it right up again, just like a sponge wicks up water. So, those are the two ends of the wires that are soldered together. Or sorry, the two ends of the wires that are tinned. Next thing, we're going to do a butt joint. No, we're not. We're going to do a lap joint. Now, I don't recommend that you do this type of joint when you solder together for real, but this is something I'm going to have you do just as an exercise. You'll probably do this 5 or 6 times until you get halfway decent at applying heat and solder to this wire. So what I want you to do next, We're going to take the two ends that we've tinned, and we are going to lay them kind of side by side like this. Okay, this is what we call a lap joint. So we'll put it together, we'll apply heat, we'll apply solder, and then we'll remove the heat from the, hopefully, the then joined wire, and we'll see how that works. Now here, see I got some dirty specks on there. That's actually the resin doing its job. Okay, again, as I said, the resin, that flux, its job there is to promote the solder, but again, it's also to help reduce oxidation. And when we're talking about doing electrical soldering, that flux is also going to try to lift any impurities from the metal and float them to the surface. So again, we don't have any type of dirt inclusions in our solder. So again, that's what you might see if you had some dirty wire. So we'll go ahead and attempt to solder these together. All right, this little device right here is what we typically refer to as helping hands. They can be used to do a variety of small work. Anybody that does any fly fishing probably uses something very similar to this when they're working on their flies there. What I'm going to use this for is to hold the wires in place. Now, I'm going to clamp one end with this one. I'm going to clamp the other side with this one over here, and hopefully place these in such a way that the two wires are laying right side by side or on top of each other. Now, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. All right, let's move you over like there. Okay. If at all possible, kind of set your wires up. Okay, kind of spring them so that they spring together. Okay, so that the normal tendency here is for them to push toward each other and not away from each other. The reason being is that as I'm soldering, if these try to pull away from each other as the solder is solidifying, then I'm going to end up with that cold joint or maybe no joint at all. All right, so what I need to do here, get my soldering iron again nice and hot. I'm going to apply a little solder to that. All right, I'm wiping it with the rag, and here we go. I'm going to apply just a little dab of solder to the tip. Okay, again, heat transfers through liquid better than that solid to solid. Now, I'm not an alcoholic, but I am shaking a little bit. I'm going to apply some heat. It has flowed now very nicely through both of those. I'm letting it cool down. I'm letting it solidify on its own, not blowing on it, not bumping the table or anything. And if all goes well, I will have a joined pair of wires or ends. Not extremely pretty, but I'm pretty sure yours aren't going to be real pretty either. So the next thing I'm going to have you do, you'll take your wire cutters and you'll cut this loop that you just made right here. And you're going to do the whole thing over again. So we'll cut the loop, strip both ends, tin them, do another lap joint, and we'll do this until you get to the point where you're fairly comfortable stripping, tinning, and soldering them. Okay, and that is our lap joint. After this, we'll go ahead and continue on with other types of joints and solder, and that's all I have for this one. Thanks for listening.